It all started when I stopped by the Starbucks on the corner of Henderson and Fifth, ordered my usual sugar-free latte, and for the first time in 6 months, I got coffee at a different temperature. Perhaps that was the first signal. But as always, I decided that this was no time to dwell on nonsense. I had a meeting with Belridge to attend and needed to get ready. I walked into the office like clockwork, at 8:14. Too early for everyone to be in place, but late enough not to start the day alone. Gina at the reception desk nodded at me, and for some reason didn't say a word. The silence in her eyes was not that of tired. It was already aware. On the desk in my office is a yellow post-it note. It was from Linda from HR. At 8:30, meeting room A. No context, no topic. I put my bag down, picked up a pen and a folder with a presentation for Belridge, reflexively. Somehow, I wanted to hold something solid in my hands. It was cool in the meeting room, as usual. Our air conditioner didn't know what spring was. Linda was already sitting in her seat. Next to her was my boss, Jared. He was wearing a new jacket and looking like he was about to take an exam. And at that moment, I knew for sure, Belridge was no longer mine. "Nora," Jared began, barely avoiding my gaze, "we've been doing a complex organizational structure assessment in connection with the new business strategy. The company is changing. We're moving to a more dynamic management model. Your position," Linda picked up, "is being made redundant. We are very grateful for your years of service. You will receive a compensation package in accordance with the terms of your contract." It all sounded like a well-studied passage from the training, How to Fire Without Hysteria. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because there was no point in saying anything else. Then there was a whole theatrical scene about joint contribution, significant impact, and great experience. All this was between the lines, but we need a younger, more flexible, more digital person. I didn't ask who was running Belridge now, I just knew. Grayson, 34 years old, clean-cut hair, an MBA from something prestigious that always sounds loud in presentations, but gets lost in Excel. He came in a year ago. His ideas were as loud as jingles in commercial breaks. His strategies were as short as the attention span of those who listened to them. We prepared materials for Belridge together, although together is a bit of a stretch. He would show up at the last minute, add a couple of graphs with vague titles, and take the final slide with the logo. And now he was the point person. I looked at Jared again. "Has the contract with Belridge been transferred?" "It's now under the responsibility of the development department," he answered quickly, "along with a new approach. We want to introduce them to a fresh team." Fresh. That's the word when you're 58. I signed the documents without any questions. I thank my past self for taking care of the line about the stock option. It doesn't compensate for the theft of 5 years of work, but that's for Chapter 2. When I left the meeting room, someone put a hand on my shoulder. It was Vivian from the law school. She didn't say anything, but her eyes said, "I couldn't protect you." And I didn't ask for it. I didn't notice it right away. And honestly, I didn't want to notice. I know all too well how corporate fatigue works. When you spend years building processes, protecting the company's interests, giving everything you have, and then, instead of a thank you, you get silence. Convenient silence. The first time I was excluded from a working meeting with Belridge was 3 months ago, without explanation. They simply moved the time to half an hour earlier, when I had another call with investors from Austin. Grayson was leading the meeting himself, although at the beginning he was just a support staff. Then came the presentations. First, my name disappeared from the title slide. Then, on internal memos. And soon enough, instead of Nora Wheatley VP, it read, "In a team with the development department led by Grayson Collins." I was joking about it with Carrie from marketing at the time. I said something like, "Now I have a new role, a ghost from Belridge." She laughed, but it was nervous, as if she didn't want to say anything unnecessary. The most interesting thing was in the details. Grayson, for example, started copying my wording from previous presentations. Literally. The same phrases, the same tables, even the font and indents. It felt like looking at your own reflection, only in someone else's shirt. He would come to my office with half-empty questions, ask me to just look with one eye, and then the same thoughts would come out of his mouth at a meeting with the management as, his vision. I didn't conflict. I just recorded it. Calmly. Clearly. In my own way. When I was invited to a strategy session in Vermont, I found out that the tickets were already booked, but not for me. My participation was not critical. Grayson, of course, was, with the whole new lineup, new young blood, as they wrote in Slack. He quickly learned to say the right things in the right tone. We are about change. We create a different energy. Our time is now. It sounded good. Empty, but beautiful. For the ears of people who no longer read the details and budgets, but look at the colors of graphs. At the same time, he asked me for a 67-page review of the presentation on Friday evening, if you have a minute. And of course, I stayed up all night, because I don't know how to do anything else. Only then did I realize that it was not a request for help. It was a test of my obedience, and my stupidity. Unfortunately, I passed both. I started to notice some people stopped greeting me. Not aggressively. It was just as if I had become something that was uncomfortable to recognize. I became an uncomfortable memory. For many people, I was the one who had stayed too long in a company where youth was currency. Sometimes I thought, maybe I should really leave. With dignity. Leave everything behind, without these half-tones and bitter looks. But then I remembered the morning calls with clients that I had to handle even before Grayson had a business card with the company logo. I remembered how we held on to Belridge after they merged, because I went there in person, sat in the kitchen with their CFO while her child was sick, and negotiated between tea and stories about the school system in Maine. And now I was just taken out of the game. Quietly. Perfectly. Without a fuss. The worst part is not the fact that you've been replaced. It's how beautifully they've learned to do it. Without any words. Without evidence. Without a chance. And at the same time, without blood. Because it was done with respect. But I know how to work with things that don't shout. I know that real decisions are not made on stage, but in draft documents, in access logs, in tiny edits to Google Drive. And believe me, I know where to look. Belridge Holdings appeared in our portfolio unexpectedly at the exact moment when we lost one of our main clients due to a merger with a competitor. Ironically, I joked at the meeting that misfortune sometimes makes room for luck. They didn't listen to me, of course, because there were no numbers back then, but I remember that first call as well as I do now. It was a Friday night, 7:23 p.m., and I was on my way home when I noticed an unfamiliar number with a Maine area code. Most people would not have answered it, but I did. And within 7 minutes, I was on the phone with Belridge's CFO, a woman named Grace Linton, who started by saying, "I don't know you, but I've been told that you are the only one who won't sell us air." In those 7 minutes, I realized the main thing. They don't need a brilliant presentation. They need confidence that we won't abandon them in the next quarter. They needed me. I spent the next 2 years in negotiations, calls, trips, eternal table corrections, dialogues that began with, "I can't officially say this, but..." Belridge were cautious. And they had every reason to be. They had experienced aggressive rater pressure and lost some of their assets. They gave out trust in microdoses. I brought them risk summaries, models for calculations, and even negotiated insurance options for their warehouses several times, although this was not our responsibility at all. They saw that I was thinking not only as a service seller, but as a person who was responsible with my head. It was Grace who once said to me, "I don't know how much you earn, but if you ever want to come to us, let me know first." We laughed at the time, but now I think it was the most sincere compliment of my career. And now, this whole project is in the hands of a person who appeared long after the deal was actually ready to go. Grayson wasn't in those negotiating rooms. He didn't hear what silence sounds like after a bad offer. He didn't see how the CFO looks at the CEO when the numbers don't add up. He didn't do it with his hands. But he is good at pretending to lead. And that seems to be enough for our management. I started looking through my notes, old correspondence, drafts of presentations. Everything was still there. I'm not the type to delete email. I opened one of the first proposals, dated back to 2022, where my name is mentioned in every second paragraph. At the end, developed under the direction of Nora Wheatley, VP, Easton & Carr, and next to it is the original signature of Grace Linton. In the new version, there is no mention of my name. The presentation is redesigned, but structurally identical. The same models, the same blocks of text, even the wording remained. They just replaced management with prepared by the team. This is not just devaluation. This is theft of intellectual contribution, and it is difficult to prove legally, but easy to prove morally. I knew that Grayson did not do this on his own. Such things are done only with approval from above. But who exactly gave the go-ahead, Jared? The CEO? HR Director Linda? Or was it a collective decision to just remove unnecessary friction? I don't know yet, but I would find out. For now, I just sat in my living room with my laptop on my lap and thought that the most dangerous thing in all of this was their confidence that I would leave quietly. And I'm not going to leave. I just hadn't decided where to go yet. This decision was not spontaneous. I knew it. In the corporate world, spontaneity is rare, especially when you're talking about $12 million and people who have been with the company for decades. The question was not why I was fired. It was why now. I started digging. I looked through internal announcements over the past year. The change of CEO is what triggered everything. Evan Mercer, 42 years old, an impeccable beard, shiny sneakers, quotes from TED Talks, and a promise to modernize the business. He talked about flexibility, adaptability, and the value of new ideas. But in practice, he signed contract after contract with external consultants who drew arrows on slides and cut off what didn't fit into PowerPoint. With his arrival, the optimizations began. First, soft ones, mergers of departments, new guidelines that for some reason duplicated the existing ones, but in simpler terms. Then came the layoffs. First, inefficient roles. Then, transitional positions. And then, personal reassessment of contribution. And somehow it happened that this reassessment affected mostly people over 50. They started with finance. Then came the legal department. HR held out for a while because it's hard to remove senior people without a scandal. But corporate development? I was the perfect candidate. I stopped being a gold standard and became a barrier to change. In the internal documents, to which I still had access a few days after my dismissal, there was a stunning phrase. We need a replacement in the Belridge direction with a focus on digital who is age-appropriate for the clientele, age-relevant. I stopped at this line for about 10 minutes. I just read it over and over again. And I imagined that one of the analysts or organizational strategists had written it, quite seriously, and I didn't even think that it could be discrimination. Because in their paradigm, it's just business. I was fired not because of my performance, but because I am an uncomfortable reminder that the system used to work not because of young presentations, but because of people who knew what to do when it collapsed. And you know what else is interesting? No one wanted to talk to me for real. Jared avoided eye contact. HR said, "These are the times." And the CEO didn't get in touch at all. Not a word, just silence. It was as if I pretended that I didn't exist, the problem would disappear by itself. I made a copy of that document with the wording about age. I saved it in a separate folder. I named it simply 04_now. I had 3 more, 01_then, 02_theft, 03_silent. I began to structure my evidence. Cold, dry, as always. No emotions. They stayed in the office next to my ID badge and office plant. While I was organizing the files, Carrie from marketing called. She spoke quietly, like people who don't want to be heard at home. "I don't know if this will help you," she began, "but I saw your Belridge file being edited from Grayson's assistant's account before the layoffs were officially announced. He didn't have access. We were writing a presentation for an internal investor, and I just happened to open the wrong version. I saw that your notes had already been replaced. Your name was erased. The style is still the same. So, they already knew." "Thank you," I said. "You won't tell anyone it was me, will you?" she asked. "No, I won't. I'm not the type. I'm really not that kind of person. That's my strength, and my advantage. Because I don't play in the style of dumping everything on LinkedIn with the hashtag #OldSentence. I don't go to the media. I just remember how it was all built, and I know where it is cracking. And now it is cracking. I don't like the word revenge. It smells like cheap drama and weakness. And I'm not talking about weakness, and definitely not about drama. That's why I called it a structural audit of the situation. On Monday morning, I sat down at my laptop, created a separate new profile with a secure folder, connected an external hard drive, and started sorting through the stuff that had accumulated in my email over the past 2 years. Everything related to Belridge, the company, the management, and everything about me. First, I divided everything into groups. I put all the work-related correspondence, old and new, with dates, attachments, and confirmations in one box. I put all the versions of the presentations in another box. Mine, edited versions, those that accidentally disappeared from the mail, and those that were signed with a different name. I put screenshots of chats, comments from internal documents, and fragments of discussions where I was excluded from the process in a separate folder. I kept everything related to changes in wording such as age, fresh team, and culture renewal separately. Because these are not just insults. This is what is called a systemic implication. And finally, access. I recorded who edited the documents and when, who made changes even before anything had officially changed. Every little thing is a key. There was a lot of information, and it was still accessible. I could log into the shared corporate system because technically my profile had not yet been disabled. This delay is one of the rare bonuses when the management wants to look ethical and gives a week for a soft end to cooperation. I did not waste this time. In the editing logs, I found confirmation. The Belridge deck draft was changed by Grayson's assistant 6 days before I was laid off. Moreover, Grayson himself commented on the stakeholder legacy management block in the document, replacing my name with the phrase, representative of the previous management. The comment is preserved, even with his initials. Evidence #1, the timeline. Evidence #2, tone. Evidence #3, intent. It wasn't enough for a court of law, but it was more than enough to talk to the right lawyer, or a client who doesn't want to deal with lies. In the afternoon, I texted Carrie again. I asked if she had seen anything like this before. She answered right away. In the presentation for Reading Capital, your Excel formulas were still there, but the authorship was rewritten. It was sometime in December, also through an assistant. Reading Capital was not my project directly, but I helped with risks during the illness of their VP. And now, again, the same scheme. I was not just removed from the deals, I was being erased from history. In the evening, I received a text from Tom from the security team. We worked together on a case 3 years ago when a client tried to break into the system through an API connection. He is a techie, silent, direct. Your profile hasn't been closed yet because the logistics responsibility for the Belridge NDA hasn't been officially transferred. This is a mistake on the part of HR, but you have 48 hours maximum. I advise you to make copies of what you have. I won't ask what you're going to do with it, but I saw you get fired. It was bad. I didn't answer much. Just, thank you. If I have to, I won't give up your name. In the corporate world, you don't say that directly. But it was an act of support. I noticed that those who were next to me at the start felt something like guilt. They cannot help openly. But they are still people. And this is actually enough. While I was collecting all this, I began to feel a new, long-forgotten sensation. Control. Not an illusion, not an emotion, but real, clear control over the situation. Like in those years when I could still stop a deal an hour before signing it because I saw a mistake in the 3rd clause of the contract. It wasn't about feeling powerful. It was about consistency. And I remembered, this is what those who play imitation have always been afraid of in me, because it was impossible to negotiate with me. I was not sold on loyalty. I was not afraid of big names. I just knew how it worked. And now I also know where it breaks down. I thought for a long time whether it was worth it. It was night, a Saturday, and I was standing in the kitchen, drinking cold water from the tap and looking out the window as if there was someone there who could give me an answer. The window was silent, just like everything around me. The silence didn't prompt, it just pressed. But the answer was only in me, and it sounded simple. If you are silent, it means you agree. And I did not agree. And so I acted. Calmly, without pathos, no slogans. I just opened the mail. I wrote a letter to Grace Linton. Short, very neat. No drama. Grace, I know that you are already in contact with the Easton and Carr team regarding the final stage of the contract. If you have half an hour, I'd like to meet for coffee in the next few days. There are a couple of things I'd like to go over in person. No conflict, just context. I sent it at 11:42 p.m. She replied at 7:03 a.m. In town today. 11:30, Delaney's Cafe as usual. This usual was not about chance. It was about memory. It was about the fact that she had seen everything too. She just had no formal reason to speak out loud. It was cold, but I wore a gray coat without buttons. I didn't want to look like I was going to a negotiation. I wasn't going to negotiate. I just had to tell the truth. Not to sell, not to explain, not to ask. I just had to state the facts. She would either accept them or not. Nothing else mattered. Grace was sitting in the corner with the same cup of green tea, as she always did when discussing difficult things. She didn't like formalities, so she started with the easy stuff. What happened, Nora? What had to happen, I answered. I was made redundant. She leaned forward a little. And was that before or after my presentation was rewritten by the boy in the sweater that said, "Agile means now"? I smiled. She already knew. She just wanted to hear from me, so I told her. They removed me to make everything fit the new vision. But the numbers, the models, even the slides are mine. And the deal is mine. And you know that. She didn't argue. She did not ask for clarifications. She just looked at me, attentively, calmly, like a person who had already made up her mind. And it was not surprise. It was anger hidden behind the coldness. I knew something was wrong, she said. I asked where you were, and they answered me, "She's at a consultation." It's strange, because I knew your back had been fine for a long time. I told her how I had been quietly taken out of the system. First, missed meetings, then inaccessible files, then presentations without a name. And how it was all done under the sauce of restructuring and cultural renewal. And that all these steps were not chaos, but systematic displacement. With a clear goal, to get rid of me before the contract was signed. They didn't even leave me a farewell letter, I said. And they appointed a new face of the deal. Even though all the signs, forecasts, and scenarios were my work, I'm not asking for a refund. I'm just recording the truth. We talked for half an hour. I did not ask for interference. I did not hand over any documents. I just voiced the timeline, the facts, the change in tone, the exclusion from access, the falsification of authorship. No hysteria, no tears. I did not play the role of a victim. I saw Grace listening. She didn't write anything down, but I knew she was memorizing every step, and not just as an interlocutor, as a financial strategist, as a partner who cares about the essence, not the picture, and the truth was the essence. "What do you want, Nora?" she asked in the end. I took a sip of cold coffee. "Only that you know the truth. The rest is up to you." She nodded. She drank the tea to the end and said, "Then I will also tell the truth. I do not want our partner to lie." She stood up. She touched my shoulder, quietly, humanly, and she left. No theater, no last words. We were not on stage. We were in reality, where the truth does not shout. It simply exists. When I left the cafe, I didn't feel victorious, but I did feel a sense of balance. I said what I had to say. And now the ball is not in my court. I didn't know what would happen next, but I finally felt silence. Not emptiness, but peace. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel trapped. I felt visible. In the evening, I received a message from Carrie. Belridge asked for a copy of the initial financial model, but not from Grayson. They asked the risk department directly, no copies, verbally. That was the signal. The balance began to tip, and I knew that a little more, and she would bring down someone who thought he was standing firm. The next morning, I woke up without an alarm clock. I just opened my eyes and immediately realized that something had changed. Not in the outside world. It was inside me. The silence that was a crack yesterday became a support today. I made tea slowly, consciously. My hands no longer trembled. The same 3 phrases did not repeat in my head like a mantra of defeat. No. I was in silence, but not in a state of fear. I was in the silence of choice. For the first time in a long time, I was not ringing. I need it urgently. There was no urgency. It was just the right thing to do. I took a sheet of notes from the table. Everything I had collected over the past week. Names, dates, copies, screenshots, wording. I looked at them like a map. It was no longer chaos. It was a structure. And every detail in this structure said, "The moment has come to speak openly." I didn't want to be the one knocking on the door. But when the door is slammed in your face, sometimes you shouldn't knock. It's worth pushing officially. First, I called Ilaria, a lawyer with whom I had once worked on a corporate dispute 5 years ago. Not only was she good at her job, but she also had a rare trait. She didn't panic. She listened for a long time, did not interrupt. "Formally speaking," she said after a pause, "you have every right to sue. There is systemic displacement, discriminatory wording, and misappropriation of authorship. But if you are not interested in the court, but in the result, I would advise you to start with an official appeal. To the CEO, and a copy to the board of directors. Everything is documented, without emotion." At most, irony. I smiled. Irony has always been my thing. I knew how to say things so that they sounded without swearing, but so that after reading them, a person would put down the phone and be silent for a long time. I opened Word. I wrote slowly, in phrases. Not as an angry statement. It was like an analytical note. It was quiet, cold, with facts. No, "I'm sorry" or "I feel." Just a structure, a timeline of my participation in the project, evidence of editing of documents before the official cut, wording that could be interpreted as age discrimination, risks to reputation in the eyes of Belridge, not mentioning a direct meeting, just a reaction. Proposed solution, official recognition of the contribution, revision of copyright, public correction of the internal presentation. I clearly outlined how I worked on the contract, when I received the first calls, when I met with the client, when I prepared the financial models. I supported this with copies of the files where the history of changes was saved. She showed how Grayson's name appeared in the document 4 days before the official announcement of the change in structure, and how mine disappeared. Quietly, with the precision of surgery. At the end, I added a phrase I had been putting off. "I am not looking for satisfaction. I'm just not ready to be silent anymore. My work is not a PowerPoint. It is my name, and you have no right to erase it." I didn't know if this would have legal consequences, but I knew for sure that it would have personal consequences. I crossed the line that separates those who swallowed and those who responded. I saved the document in a PDF. I sent it officially. I sent it officially through the corporate mailbox, which was still active. The copy was copied to the legal department and 2 people from the board of directors whom I had once supported in a difficult moment. Now it was my turn. This was my manifesto. Not about the war. It was about memory. About the fact that experience is not a number on a resume. It is the weight of words. And if my words didn't fit in their new culture, then their culture was too light. A few hours later, I received an automatic response. "Your request has been registered." And in another one, I received a short letter from a corporate lawyer. "We have received your request. An internal review has been initiated. Expect feedback." I didn't expect an instant miracle, but I knew that the system could no longer pretend that I did not exist. They would either respond or admit that they were afraid to say out loud why they were silent. I had no plan for the next day, but I had a clear conscience and a straight face. Sometimes that's enough to keep you going, even if it seems that things are getting even darker. The first effect was barely noticeable, like a slight push in the water when you don't see the circle yet, but you already know that the wave is coming. Everything still looked calm, but I could already feel a new force flowing under the surface. Belridge sent an official letter. "Due to changes in the management structure, we are forced to temporarily suspend the signing of the final documents. We appreciate the cooperation with Easton and Carr, but we need to clarify a number of issues regarding the authorship and management of the project." I reread these sentences several times. I didn't gloat. I'm not that kind of person. But something inside me fell into place. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition. They couldn't erase my name completely. Then the chain began. Small events that might seem random in another world. But here, everything took on meaning. Former financial analyst Devon, the same one who used to send me spreadsheets at night because they didn't have time officially, left a reaction under an internal Slack post about the delay with Belridge. It was completely informal, but I saw that he remembered everything. The next morning, a call from HR. Dry, streamlined. We have received your document. We're investigating the circumstances internally. Please refrain from direct contact with clients or commenting on the situation. In other words, keep quiet. Only now it's official. I politely acknowledged receipt and left a comment. I am acting solely within the framework of my right to reputational protection. You do realize that silence is also an action, right? A pause. They had no answer. And they had no instructions on how to react when a woman over 55 is not confused but calm. The same day, Carrie wrote to me. No longer timid, not between the lines. I told Jared that I think the situation is unfair. I don't know if it will make a difference, but I don't want to pretend that everything is normal anymore. She was the first, but she was not the only one. Gradually, messages began to arrive. Some just said, I remember when you pulled the deal with the Armand Group in 2021. Others said, thank you for daring. And others said, I thought it was just me. They did not take my side publicly, but they were no longer silent, and that was enough. Several friends from the legal department began to accidentally send me templates of internal appeals, those that I was not officially supposed to see. One of them contained the phrase, consideration of the personal contribution of key employees to the structure of client decisions. Perfectly worded, right? Without a single word about me, but the whole point is in the subtext. On Friday afternoon, I received a letter from the board of directors. Given the facts, the company recognizes that there were violations in the procedure for transferring the Belridge project. The issue of your authorship will be considered at the next board meeting. We would also like to inform you that Mr. Grayson has been temporarily suspended pending an internal review. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt responsible, because if I started it, I had to finish it. Not for my own sake, for the sake of the system, for the sake of those who had been silent longer than me. In the evening, Robert, a member of the council, the same one who a week ago did not ask why, but asked me what I wanted, called. His voice was serious, but not tense. They are discussing the option of an internal public correction, a press release, or a letter to the client clarifying roles. Would that be enough? I thought about it, and answered. If it's formal, no. If it is human, yes. I am not looking for compensation. I want the truth to remain in the system. He agreed, and he sent a draft. It was not perfect, but it was honest. My name was on it where it should have been, under the words project management, strategy, and client trust. An hour later, I received a message from Grace Linton. Thank you for speaking up. This is a rare thing in the corporate world. At Belridge, we value not only the result, but also the way it was achieved, and we know who has traveled that road. I read these lines, and for the first time in this entire period, I cried. Not hysterically, just quietly, because I no longer needed to prove that I existed. I went out to the balcony. I breathed in the air and realized I am no longer where they tried to leave me. I am ahead. The silence came not as a discharge, but as a lingering state that had lasted too long. All the steps have been taken. All applications have been sent. Support has been received. And then what? The void between before and after. On Monday morning, I woke up and for the first time didn't open my email. I just sat by the window with a cup of black coffee and watched the city slowly wake up, as if I was waiting for an answer that I had to give myself. But the answer was silent. But it was already there. In the last few days, everything seemed to have changed in the office, but nothing was really different. I received a new email. My contribution to the Belridge project was officially confirmed. The updated presentation was distributed internally, and my name was returned. Grayson had taken an extended leave of absence, and that seemed to be it. But there was no joy in me, only fatigue. Because victory without trust is an empty frame. It's beautiful, but not yours. And the worst thing is that they sincerely thought that this was enough, that a gesture and an official letter are equal to justice. But they forgot one thing: justice is not a formality. It is the silence in which you are no longer ashamed to breathe. I received a phone call. Carrie wanted to meet. Robert wrote that the board appreciates your principled position and would like to discuss your new role. Even the new CEO, Caroline Strike, left a voicemail. We can restart from scratch, with you. I listened to these words and could not understand what I was feeling. I saw that everyone was trying to be right now. But correctness after silence is not sincerity. It is the fear of losing face. I opened the corporate portal. There was already news there. Easton and Carr revises project management policies and implements open source principles. My story, without my name. Again, allegedly as an exception that caused the change. But an exception is always someone specific. It was me. That evening, I went to the old park near my office, the place where I used to sit with a notebook and draw the first diagrams of the partnership model back in 2009, where I used to stop after evening presentations. And for the first time in all this time, she allowed herself to think, maybe I've already done everything I was supposed to do. Not only the environment has changed, I had changed. I was no longer afraid of my silence. My pause was no longer a weakness. I stopped reacting. I started to choose myself, my boundaries, my voice. I opened my laptop. I started writing a letter, not with claims and not with emotions. Just as it is. I am grateful for what happened. It taught me more than decades of career, but I don't see any point in continuing to work where dignity needs to be defended, not taken for granted. I am not resigning. I am going to freedom. She kept it as a draft. She did not send it. Not yet. Because there should always be a pause before the final choice, even if you already know the answer, and sometimes the pause is the choice. On Wednesday, I received a call from a woman I hadn't heard from in almost a decade, Alice Matthews, a former partner in the commercial strategy department. She had quit before all this happened, and at the time it seemed impulsive. You have no idea how many of us are like that. We just kept quiet. We thought we couldn't stand up to the system alone. And now we see that you have survived. We talked for almost an hour. She invited me to an informal meeting. Women's Circle, she called it. No titles, no official roles. Just a space where women with experience could speak out loud. And at that moment, I felt that maybe the answer was not to stay or leave. Maybe the answer is to build something new. And also in never being silent again. Even when everything is already decided. Even when everything has been settled. Because silence is a habit that has been imposed on us for years. And now I choose a word. Even if it is not convenient. Even if it is unexpected. Especially then. I woke up on Friday without an alarm clock. My fingers reached for a cup of coffee. This time, not to wake up, but to record it. Subconsciously, I knew that this day would not be ordinary, but I was not afraid. I had already gone through everything that scared me. In the morning, it was mirror quiet. Nothing new in the mail. There were formal greetings in the chats. In the air, a tense, after the storm. But there was no storm inside me. There was light, transparent, like an autumn morning, when the trees have not yet lost their golden color, but no longer hide their shadows. I opened the same draft letter I had written a few days ago. I read it through. I added a new sentence. I am not going against. I am going for myself, and for those who are still afraid. I signed it. I pressed send, and to be honest, I didn't feel anything catastrophic. There was no fanfare. There were no tears. It was something much calmer, like after a difficult conversation, when all the words have been said, and now there is only silence, but it is honest. 40 minutes later, Robert called. Are you sure? Absolutely. But don't worry, I won't burn any bridges. I just won't build them myself anymore. Pause. I'm gonna miss you. I'll miss you too, but I'll be here. Just in a different role. In a role that doesn't require silence to survive. We said goodbye warmly, without pathos, without falsehood, like adults who understand that some paths have to end to make room for new ones. The next day I received a letter from Carolina, the new CEO. Short, without corporate glamour. You're right, we are all guilty. If you ever want to, the door is open, and thank you for your voice. I kept this letter, not because I plan to return, but because even systems can hear. To put it quite clearly, I left the office on Friday at 6:17 p.m. No boxes, no fanfare, only with a notebook in my bag in which I had once written down, "The main thing is not to get lost among other people's schemes." On the way out, I was stopped by a new girl from the reception. "You are the same. Nora, right?" "Yes, I am. And you are?" "Anya. I've been reading the projects you've launched. I thought you were already a legend." "I'm not a legend. It's just that I didn't agree to be silent when I needed to speak." She smiled, and so did I, and she left. A week passed, then 2, then a month. I didn't come back, but I didn't disappear either. I began to collect women who survived. Each one has her own story. All of them are different, but each of them was once silent, and now they are ready to share. We meet in a small office in the center. No sign, no protocols. We just talk. Someone brings cookies. Someone brings a laptop. Someone brings silence. But now it's not that silence anymore. I no longer have a position, but I have a name, and there is a voice, and there are those who hear it. And more importantly, I now know that a voice does not need a microphone. It needs presence. With each meeting, I feel that my story becomes not an exception, but an example. And not to repeat it, but to know that it is possible. It is possible to go through the system without losing yourself. It is possible to lose a position and win yourself. Once, a former colleague from the law school came to us. She brought a flash drive. It was unsigned, no explanation. She just left it on the table. "You'll know what to do with it," she said. And I did. It was a sign of trust, not in the past, but in who I had become. Another woman from the logistics department, who had not dared to say hello in the corridor before, came up to me one day and said, "You gave me permission not to be patient." And I realized that my exit was not an escape. It was a key. I don't want to go back anymore, but I am ready to return to others, those who are still there, in the system, in fear, in inner silence. I am not pulling anyone out by the hand, but I leave the door open. Sometimes I get calls with new offers, consultations, coaching, a role on a new board. I listen, I smile, and I refuse. Because for the first time in my life, I don't want to enter. I want to create. I know I will never receive an official apology, but I don't need it, because the best apology is silence, in which you are no longer afraid to be yourself. Is this the end? No, this is the beginning, and this time it's mine.